Hello and welcome. Good evening. Hi, I'm Jessica Long, and I'm the Senior Director of Advancement for the UF Whitney Lab and for UF Historic St. Augustine, which you'll hear a little bit more about tonight. If you haven't been to the Whitney Lab before, just a little bit about us. We are a full-time research institute of the University of Florida, and we have 11 faculty laboratories that are looking into problems of human health and the environment. We actually train graduate students and postdoctoral researchers mostly, and they go on to be tomorrow's scientists. So it's a very exciting place to be. We have about 60 people working here. And we also have a K-12 program and a sea turtle program that you may have heard about. So if you want to learn more about us, please go to our website or ask me or any of our folks that are here tonight. So I'm here to support our programs. And if you ever have questions about that, also happy to talk to you. So tonight, I'm really excited to bring two speakers here locally that do work with us, who are both University of Florida graduates. And they're applying that research to help us in our community here in St. Augustine. So Dr. Cleary Larkin is the acting director of the Historic Preservation Institute, and she works both here in St. Augustine and in historic Nantucket through University of Florida programs. And before that, she actually worked on a resiliency program with one of the towns in Florida that was very impacted by hurricanes. She got her architecture degree at University of Arkansas and her master's in historic preservation at Columbia University and her PhD at, like I said, the greatest University of Florida. Top 5 university, have to mention that. And Dr. Sujin Kim is a research assistant faculty member here at the University of Florida. And he has done some really exciting work that he's going to share with you about using advanced technology to look at historic preservation. He got his architecture degree and his master's in historic preservation at UT Austin and his PhD at the University of Florida. Without further ado, I want to introduce our speakers and have them come up and share their stories with you. Thank you.
So we go together, or
I'm just going to speak right. Good evening. Can you all hear me okay? Terrific. Okay. I'm going to turn on my slideshow. There we go. Okay, so I'm Cleary Larkin. Thank you so much for coming tonight. I'm really pleased for this invitation from the Whitney Labs. I am a big fan of environmental work. And really, I moved to Florida in 2015. And I think since moving here, I've just been really impressed by the significant love that Floridians have for their environment and the realization that nature and culture need to live together and have lived together for hundreds of years here in Florida. And so how can we as preservationists and researchers and teachers in the built environment consider that as part of our work? So I'm here tonight to introduce our University of Florida Historic Preservation Program. We are based in Gainesville, and also our local research arm, the Preservation Institute, St. Augustine. We call it PISA for short. We're still in Florida, not Italy, but if you hear me say PISA, that is what I'm referring to. So I'm going to provide just a really broad overview of some of the work that we've done here in St. Augustine. And then I'm going to pass the stage over to Dr. Sujin Kim to really explain in detail the most recent project that investigates the impacts of sea level rise and storms upon St. Augustine's historic resources. The University of Florida's Historic Preservation Program prepares the next generation of leaders to manage the change of architectural, historical, and cultural resources across Florida. So you think about the built environment and architecture, but you also have to understand people and culture and history. So we work across Florida, the United States, and globally. We provide an integrated approach to training new practitioners by combining coursework, research, and service learning activities. We love to partner with communities on projects, and we love to explore applied historic preservation theory in a diversity of historic places. So our current projects are based in St. Augustine, in Nantucket, as Jessica mentioned, Miami, Sarasota, the Panhandle, and internationally, currently in places like Trinidad and Tobago. Our program offers a 2-year Master of Historic Preservation, a PhD with a concentration in historic preservation, and certificates in historic preservation for students majoring in other disciplines. We also offer concurrent degrees so that students can receive their master's in historic preservation at the same time they're earning other graduate degrees, such as architecture or urban planning. Our students hold a variety of backgrounds and interests. So in addition to architecture and history, we have geographers, historians, political scientists, museum studies, archaeologists. And I think one of the things that I love the most about historic preservation is the real interdisciplinarity that you find within the practice. Our program has a really long history, and it's actually one of the earliest preservation programs in the United States. Through the College of Architecture and Fine Arts, historic preservation coursework was first offered in 1957. So I'd like to note that that's 9 years before the federal policy for preservation, called the National Historic Preservation Act, was enacted in 1966. So we were ahead of the game already. We have a long line of distinguished faculty who were practicing architects, historians, preservationists. I would especially like to mention Herschel Shepard, who is a professor emeritus in architecture and is part of the incredible team of practitioners that worked on the restorations of the state-owned buildings in St. Augustine's Historic Center. Through Herschel and later faculty such as Jan Matthews and Marty Hilton, UF's Historic Preservation Program has been working here in St. Augustine for decades. And I just wanted to point out something that I want to just bring up for you. You can see that our milestones of UF Historic Preservation, one of the things that Jessica mentioned was our work in Nantucket. Preservation Institute Nantucket was established in 1972. That is a summer field course that we have offered to college students from across the US and across the world. 50 years last year. We celebrated a big anniversary. And we informally call that PIN, Preservation Institute Nantucket. And that model of PIN was really the model for establishing PISA here in St. Augustine. We wanted to create a local field course, a local research center for historic preservation here in St. Augustine. And really what we found is that the similarities between St. Augustine and Nantucket actually are a lot closer than I think anybody had imagined. So it's a really great way to learn from each other and apply what we learn in different places to similar problems across the United States. So a little bit about how we got to St. Augustine formally. In 2007, the state of Florida passed legislation that granted University of Florida management of these almost 40 structures that they owned. And from 2009 to 10, UF developed a strategic plan and created what's called a direct support organization of UF. It's called Historic St. Augustine. Some of you may have heard of it. We call it HSA. And HSA is really a functioning board that supports historic preservation and historic preservation education here in St. Augustine. And so in 2017, working with HSA, we were able to formally institute PISA. So we created a headquarters at the governor's house downtown. We have the use of the UF library and archives, and we really aim to work with HSA with the city of St. Augustine, with Flagler College, and other organizations to provide learning opportunities for students and the general public regarding the history of the city and its significant heritage. And this also includes the challenges that historic communities and coastal communities face in contemporary context. So these are some of the St. Augustine's historic state-owned buildings downtown. With our partnership with Historic St. Augustine, really our initial activities have been to work with them on these 38 buildings. So this includes initial activities that provide coursework for our students and graduate research assistantships focusing on these buildings. And two of the first things that we have been working on with HSA are providing historic structure reports and HABS level documentation. So when I say HABS, that's another acronym for the Historic American Building Survey. And I'll run you through a little bit about these historic structure reports and the HABS documentation. So when we do a historic structures report for one of the buildings that is owned by the state, these are the 7 steps that are incorporated into that. First is historical research. So we'll bring the students over and make use of the archives and the Smathers Library for St. Augustine at the Governor's House. We'll also go to the Historical Society and other local repositories to gather this archival research. This tells us as much of the history as we need to know. We'll look at the existing conditions and note and do a survey of that. So we're looking for deterioration of materials, water damage, wood rot, masonry cracking. Do windows and doors need repair? How is the roof? If there's been a recent storm or flooding, we'll make note of that. We work very closely with the Historic St. Augustine facilities and property manager. And so we have a good record of maintenance work that's been happening and changes to the building that have happened over time. The third thing that we do, and Sujin really leads this charge, is the measured drawings and photography. So he'll explain a little bit about how he uses 3D laser scanning for this, but we're also training students to learn how to measure buildings, how to draw buildings, how to photograph and document them. This creates an archival record for the future as well. And I did just want to let you all know, and let's see if I remember how to do this. Have to drag this over to here. I'm getting there, hang on one second. There we go. Okay, so this is the Library of Congress website. The Historic American Building Survey, HABS, was created during the Depression as a way to put architects to work documenting the historic buildings in the United States. And so at that time, the architects would go out and they would hand measure and hand draw buildings. And it was preservation through documentation, and all the drawings went to the Library of Congress. So you can get on the Library of Congress's website and you can look up any historic building to see if it has a HABS drawing. These are the kind of drawings that we create in our program. And I pulled this one up. If you look up St. Augustine in HABS, there are 35 pages of records. So these records include drawings, photographs, historic reports. It's all in the Library of Congress, and they've been working on digitizing the entire collection. For you engineering nerds out there, there's also HAIR, Historic American Engineering Record. So I encourage you to do some browsing through here. I just wanted to show you, this is the Antonio Trier house on Spanish Street in St. Augustine. And this is one of the drawings that was done for the house. And let me just pull this out here. So you can see this is the kind of level of architectural delineation and documentation that needs to be done in order to make it into the Library of Congress. These are called elevation drawings. We create plan drawings, elevations, sections through the buildings, details of architectural elements. So I just wanted to give you a little idea that this has been happening since 1933 and is still really a very critical part of architectural preservation. Okay. Now let me get back to my slideshow. Pardon me. Okay. Thank you for the digression. So the fourth step in our process is material investigation and testing. So in addition to using our eyes to look at buildings, we'll use our hands to feel materials. Is it cold? Is it damp? Is it sandy? Is it crumbly? We also have a materials lab. It was created and installed in the governor's house right before the pandemic. So we have not had a lot of chance to put it to use yet, but it's there. And it's a wonderful way of testing plaster, paint, mortar, coquina, a local stone that has been used here since the 16th century. And we're really looking at the material makeup, investigating deterioration patterns. And because of that, we are able to take that information and make recommendations for treatment. Step 5 is the evaluation of significance. Why is this building important? And, you know, I think we can automatically look at a historic building and perhaps we feel something for it, but we have to be able to be legal and make an argument for its significance. The National Register of Historic Preservation, the National Register of Historic Places says that there are criteria for significance. Was there a significant event that happened at the site? Was there a person, a significant person that the site is associated with? Is the architecture, the engineering, the design significant? Does it have potential to tell us something through archaeology, which in St. Augustine we know is a very critical component of all of our historic resources here. So we develop an evaluation of significance. The next step then is, okay, what is our recommendation for a treatment approach? We do this by evaluating our significance, looking at the entire building and understanding the history and the evolution of the building. What areas need to be restored back to an important period of time for this building? What areas have been changed so much that there's nothing historic left? Maybe we just leave that as is. Maybe we preserve some of it to show the evolution of a building. Maybe we do a recreation of a space to show what it was like in a significant period. So we follow the Secretary of the Interior, the Department of the Interior, the National Park Service. They have standards for treatment of historic properties. And that's what we use in order to make recommendations for a treatment approach. And then we develop specific work recommendations. And this is where we say, okay, you need to repair these windows. You need to recaulk. You need to repoint the masonry joints. You might need to replace something in kind. It's deteriorated past its lifespan. So how do you replace it and make it compatible? So all of these elements go into a historic structure report for one building, and it provides a full history and documentation of the life of a building. What's great about that is that HSA, the Historic St. Augustine, Inc., as the steward of these state-owned buildings, then has a record. It has a full record of the life of a building, and it can use these evaluations of significance and treatment recommendations to proceed with any future work that needs to happen. So this is what we do for HSA. These are the completed projects that have been done since 2017. So the Paredes Dodge House, that level 1 HABS documentation, the drawings that go into the Library of Congress, and the HSR, the Historic Structure Report. In 2019, phase 1 documentation, initial documentation of the St. Francis Barracks, work digitally documenting Nombre de Dios with Dr. Kathy Deegan. We did a survey and an update of the HSA properties that needed to be newly surveyed. So the state of Florida has what's called a Florida Master Site File. So the State Historic Preservation Office holds this list of all of the historic properties in the state. And every now and then you have to make sure that the survey information is up to date. So we did that for 11 of the properties that needed it. Recently, the program has been looking at coquina and a study of coquina buildings and a study of coquina materials. And this has been a big collaboration between a lot of architects, a lot of materials conservators, a lot of historians, a lot of crafts and trades people that work with this material. This material in the United States is really only here in Florida. And so how do you study that material? How do you understand what it's like to work with that locally? And for this particular area, how does that material how is it impacted by sea level rise, by saltwater intrusion? So coquina is a really important material for St. Augustine that we hope to continue to study with our materials conservation lab. Last year, we finished the documentation for the Arribas House, and this year we are working on the Juanita and the de Mesa Sanchez houses. And I just want to note that these projects are done by our graduate assistants and by our students in their coursework at UF. And so I'm the interim director. I've been in this position for 1.5 years. I'd really like to note that much of this work was completed under supervision of my predecessor, Marty Hilton, and our third faculty member, Dr. Linda Stevenson, who couldn't be with us here tonight. But so we are going to continue our work for HSA, fully documenting and compiling the information for these 38 historic buildings in historic St. Augustine. And just to give you an idea of what some of the process is, Sujin will show you a little bit more about this process, but this is the Arribas House, and this is a 3D laser scanner on the left, and the 3D laser scan of the house as it is. And so the students take that information, but they also go and do the archival research. You can see that there were original drawings from the 1990s when a restoration was done and earlier documentation was done. The archives have all sorts of historic information. So they're compiling all of this. They're also on site. They're measuring, they're looking, they're seeing it with their own eyes, they're touching it with their hands, they're drawing it. You know, to draw something by hand is really to know it and to understand it. And we love technology, computers, lasers, our phones. That's amazing. To be able to draw by hand really puts you in touch with the building. And so we still like the students to get on site and understand that process and learn the building that way, because then they can compile everything that they know and they can create diagrams and models like this that show the evolution of the Arribas House from 1650 to 1960. And so using the 3D modeling that was created by laser scanning, using historic drawings that show us the plans of the buildings, being in the house, looking with our eyes, knowing with our expertise, this material, this trim, this decoration is from this era. Look at this, this is from this era. As an architectural preservationist, those are all the clues that you put together to understand the life of a building. I also just wanted to show this. I wasn't involved with this project either, but there is really some fascinating work happening in St. Augustine with architecture and with archaeology. And this was laser scanning that helped with the Nombre de Dios excavation of the foundations on site. And so those are archaeologists working with Dr. Kathy Deegan on site. And this is a drawing that was created using 3D laser scanning so that you can get exact dimensions of rubble that's been underground. You know, dirt doesn't have 90-degree angles, and these foundations don't have 90-degree angles. So using the technology to document archaeology is also available, and something that we love to work with archaeologists as well. And St. Augustine just has a wealth and abundance of this. So this was, I thought, was just a really fabulous example of what technology can do. Lastly, I just want to briefly introduce the Hurricane Irma Historic Resource Mitigation Project. This was a survey and inventory of Hurricane Irma's impacts to St. Augustine's Town Plan National Historic Landmark. This was funded by the National Park Service, and our partners were the City of St. Augustine, the Florida Division of Historical Resources, UF HSA, and the chair, Alan Lassinger. And this project happened from 2020 to 2022. And Sujin's going to talk a little bit about his part in this, but I wanted to just say that PISA is here to work on all sorts of projects, not just the 38 state-owned projects, but we're here to develop community-based work. I have a student writing his master's thesis on Lincolnville, and he's working with the CRA executive director over there. We bring students over to get them interested in everything that's happening in St. Augustine. We think a lot about tourism and sustainable tourism and its impacts on historic communities. And then this is an example of the kind of federal grant funding that we can get to work on cultural and historic resources. So this grant was broken into 5 tasks. A resurvey of some of the buildings in historic downtown, putting that information into a GIS database. I mentioned the Coquina Resilience Study and the National Historic Landmark Nomination Update. Again, preservation is never done. We always have to keep updating and keep rethinking about significance and material condition. And then the sea level rise projection modeling and vulnerability assessment that Sujin will talk about. So just to show you a little bit of what this work looks like, this is the Cultural Resource Survey. Sujin and his postdoctoral fellow, Leisha Chen, worked on this. And this is really using a GIS database to map buildings and show materials, show their date of construction. You can put any information you want to in here, and you can map it and kind of compare the differences and similarities between buildings. So it's a great way of keeping track of survey information. This is the Coquina Resilience Study. The city has been working really hard on providing guidance for homeowners for flood mitigation. And Sarah is here tonight. I know you worked on this project, and this is just something that's really important to get information out to homeowners to educate on sea level rise and changing climate and how that impacts our historic buildings and historic materials. With that, I'm going to end and pass it off to Sujin to dive a little deeper into our projects. But I did want to say that, we're not here permanently, we're not here every day, but we're 90 minutes away, and we hope in the future to be here more regularly and have a more permanent home in St. Augustine. We're looking forward to re-energizing our lab now that hopefully the pandemic is on the wane a bit. And if you ever want to get in touch, I do have business cards here tonight. You can get on our website. We post a lot on Facebook, and Sujin also puts a lot of his video work on YouTube. So that is all on our UF Historic Preservation Program website as well. Thank you so much for your attention and your time. And I'm going to have Sujin come up. Slideshow. Here you go. Okay.
Okay. Hello, good evening. Thank you for being here. So I'll continue our conversation about what we do at the University of Florida Historic Preservation Program. Hey, Trey, how are you? Okay. All right. So I'll be more focused on our work on the 3D documentation and simulation to research the coastal heritage and urban environment and sea level rise impacts on them. All right, so I often use this picture in my class to explain the importance of preventive documentation for built heritage. So this is a police station that my son and I built with the Lego blocks when he was younger. He doesn't do it anymore. But so we're happy, like once this masterpiece was done, but then, it didn't last forever. In a few weeks, he didn't care anymore and then destroyed it by accident. So when it happens, that's when he started looking for the documentation. Then I have to ask, so where is your instruction? Of course, he threw that away immediately. And did you take any photograph? No, of course not. So then it becomes really difficult to put the things together exact the same way. And so that happens in reality sometimes too. So this is why it's important that we kind of go ahead and do the documentation when we still have a chance. All right, so as Dr. Larkin mentioned, we've been utilizing the 3D laser scanning technology to facilitate our documentation and research on the built heritage. And I want to show you what the data looks like. So this example is our ongoing project for the Deering Estate in Miami. And I want to play the video. So we'll start to move. So the data is not merely a visualization of the built environment, but it's more of a repository of measurement of the built environment. So for instance, I want to cut the section through, and then I measure the height from one floor to another. And then also I'm going to cut the floor plan like that. And it's not only the structure information, but also everything visible can be captured. So for instance, this is a museum. So we were able to record all those collections as well. So, but the limitation of the technology is that is only capturing the visible surfaces. It doesn't do such a things like X-ray, to see the the features inside the wall or underground features, those are not captured. But still, it's limited to above ground features and visible surfaces, but still it gives a lot of good information for our work. All right, so Dr. Larkin also talked a little bit about the HAPS documentation. So the technology also gave us a lot of opportunities to work on and help the underrepresented communities and their heritage. So for instance, these drawings were informed by the laser scan data. These drawings are representing the Mount Carmel Baptist Church, which was the epicenter for the civil rights movement in Gainesville. And another set of drawings. And we also, as Dr. Larkin mentioned, we also do the field surveys by hand as well to get those details like windows. And this is another our recent project. So the previous projects were all funded project, grant funded project, but we sometimes do also pro bono surveys for the communities where the help is needed. And it's not only the faculty volunteering, but also we always engage our students in these kind of projects as well. So this is Rosenwald School in Oklahoma, which was built for African-American children. And this one is also representing a typical two-teacher kind of T-shaped floor plan that was built a lot in the southern region in the United States. All right, so then I want to talk more about the how we use this technology and our research to analyze the sea level rise impacts on the St. Augustine heritage and urban environments. All right, so the examples I showed you previously were more of the records of the individual structures, but we also do a lot of work on the urban landscapes and cultural landscapes like this. So this particular project, the data acquisition covered the entire the town plan National Historic Landmark District, including the Castillo de San Marcos, all the way down to the residential area to the south. All right, and then from the data, we use the data for the virtual simulation of the potential impact of sea level rise on the built environment in St. Augustine. And this image is showing the kind of potential kind of impact in 2080. So we'll get back to more of the simulation outcomes later. All right, so why do we start this kind of effort? So we started our effort and research on sea level rise impacts on the built environment since 2016. So we started as a pilot study for Cedar Key, Florida. So during the pilot project, we learned three major challenges to communicating information on sea level rise at the community level. So first, people tend to have a preconceived ideas about climate change. So second, the very subject, sea level rise, tend to be or seemingly surreal, abstract, and far distance phenomenon. So and the last one, third, so we need a better kind of communication method to convey this scientific information to the public and other experts. All right, so yeah, the video is playing. So we didn't start as the virtual digital model. But at the very beginning, we just tried the building a physical model. And then we simply put the model in the water tank. And then we displayed it as part of the public lecture, like what we do today. But then we saw the potential because after this whole lecture series, people gathered around this water tank. And then amazingly, people started talking about the issue. Previously, it was really hard to even start the conversation. But while they're looking at this kind of fun-looking model, their conversations like, oh, that's my favorite restaurant right there. I went to that post office yesterday, things like that. And then they're watching the potential impact of rising sea levels there. So, and then, okay, we're like, this works. So we also developed and tried this virtual and digital simulation and model to visualize those scientific and numeric data. And then it worked even better. So the visualization tool proved the kind of strong tool for the communication on this subject by reducing the abstractness and also enhancing the relatability of this global issue to the local context. So we continued to articulate our methodology while we're applying the method to different projects. And then I'll talk a little bit about the methodology. So this workflow is done in 4 phases. So in phase 1 is all about gathering the data, including the latest scan data that I showed you previously. And also not only the latest scan data, but also the all kind of information about the heritage and history, each individual's attributes, things like that. So for this project, again, the study area included the entire National Historic Landmark District from the Castillo de San Marcos down to the residential area. And then on the right-hand side, you see the picture of the physical environment. And at the bottom, you see the digital replica of the physical environment there. All right, so the subject included the monuments, not only the monument, but also all the neighborhood and streetscapes and buildings and landscape structures, objects, everything we could see from the street. We didn't get inside each building, but we focused on the street elevations that were visible from the streets. Okay, so these are some of the snapshots of the data. Well, since these streets are always very popular and crowded, the data included a lot of what we call noise, like from moving people and vehicles, but we clean them up all. So these pictures are showing the kind of situations of the street, and the kind of funny thing is the bottom left side, the picture is showing that the food delivery truck just stopped in front of the scanner. So each scanning takes about a few minutes, but in the middle of scanning work, this huge truck stopped, and then I couldn't capture the building, but the truck. But this happens a lot because we're dealing with the living environment. But so these are some of the challenges we always address in the field. So in second phase, we kind of align all those data, including geographic data and sea level rise data and our those digital replica of the built environment data. We align them all together. So first step is we gather these geographical information that's available to the public. So the data might be covering the entire state, but often these elevation data is done like for each county. So, but the data is open to the public, and so we measure the ground elevation from this data we call digital elevation model, or DEM. And then this tidal datum is also kind of looked at, so that we can make sure that all the data is referenced to the one common geodetic datum. Otherwise, we're dealing with water. So water, the seawater has a tide, high tide and low tide. So if you kind of all the data is referenced to a different tidal datum, then you cannot align the data. So we have to pick one reference data and make sure that everything is aligned exactly. So they also collected the sea level rise data projections from, for instance, we got the data from NOAA, and we chose the intermediate high level scenario, which is kind of medium level intensity. Okay, so in phase 3, we start doing the simulation and modeling visualization. So I'm going to show you the outcomes here. So we kind of simulated the potential impacts from the 5 locations in that district. So number 1, we'll be looking at the Castillo de San Marcos, and number 2, the Bridge of Lions, and number 3, the west side, the hotel area, and the college. And then number 4, the southeastern corner, and then number 5 at the very south end, looking at the residential area. Okay, so this is the current condition of the national monument. And then according to the NOAA's projection, maybe from 2050, that you'll start to you might see the water around the structure, but until this point it might be okay. You can still access the structure, but from 2080 you might lose your access to the building unless you ride a boat or something. And then, but still the structure itself might be okay, it's away from the water. I mean, I'm talking about the interior, the courtyard, but by 2100, also the interior courtyard might be inundated as well. So these water, the virtual water is not representing the temporary storm event, but is showing you a daily situation, showing the high tides. So that's what's kind of serious about sea level rise. People are often confused because they might imagine the storm event that might happen in one day and go away next day. But the sea level rise, the problem is the change happens very slowly but gradually, and once it comes here, it's permanent. So that's what's kind of scary about the sea level rise. And okay, so the second area is the Bridge of Lions, the intersection, the state road. Okay, so by 2070, the daily traffic might be interrupted by this high tides, but then by 2080, perhaps the road might not be passable anymore, and it gets worse. We're looking at this hotel area and the city hall in the back. Okay, so nothing happens until 2080 in this area, but we have to pay attention to the fact that the St. Augustine overall topography is quite flat, and that's a kind of problem because once it reaches the tipping point, the impact becomes very immense. So it's not really gradual, maybe. So that's kind of what we have to consider as well. So I'll continue the, this is St. Francis Barracks on the left-hand side. And perhaps everyone's aware of these kind of houses. They've been elevated. And then some houses have built like walls around their property. But the properties might be okay for a while, but the streets have to be, something has to be done. Otherwise, it's not going to be kind of passable anymore. And even the seawall, the kind of newer seawall will be also compromised by 2060 or 70, according to the NOAA's projection. And it becomes like worse. Okay, so the last ones are looking at the residential area, but also is looking at this national cemetery. So the thing is, our study area, which is National Historic Landmark District, the whole district is an archaeological site, in fact. So, so the impact is not only on the above ground resources, but also is going to impact underground resources as well. So we need some measures to protect them too. Okay, the last phase, I will not talk too much about this last phase, but we also, I mean, Dr. Larkin already mentioned the our work with the GIS technology. So we also develop the interactive GIS database where we can kind of put together all the kind of structural attributes and heritage information for each individual property where the information is available. And also we put kind of this survey forms for easier access for the public, so they don't have to always call the state office to ask for the forms. That's our goal. So that's a thing. And then based on those information, you can get, I mean, individual property owners or the city planners and other experts can, based on their understanding and information, they can also look at those guidelines that are developed by other experts nationwide and then locally regarding the adaptation and mitigation as well. All right, so this is my last slide. So this, hopefully we kind of entertained you in the evening. So if you have any questions, do you want to come here? And if you have any questions and comments, you're welcome.
Thank you. So just wanted to wrap up by saying you all live here. You see this happening regularly. You know, the tidal floods and the rainstorms and closure of streets and people kayaking during floods, which you see on the national news now. I think one of the challenges for this generation of practitioners and how we have to train students to think about this is really a little bit in contrast to the discipline of historic preservation as it was originally created. You know, the word preservation, we're going to preserve things in perpetuity. And now we are at the point of, we are losing structures and we are losing historic resources, but with data collection and information from NOAA, from laser scanning, working collaboratively with building owners, local, state, federal governments, we have the ability to finally be proactive about this and make decisions about what's important. There's no right answer. It's not black and white. It varies by context, by city, by neighborhood. by building. And that's the challenge for us. And I think that's one of the reasons why we love doing what we do. And we do work like this in communities across the Southeast and the East Coast so far. And the challenge is the same everywhere. So at least we are all, you know, in the United States, at least starting to look at this together and looking at different communities and what people are doing about this collectively. So we're here to answer any questions that you might have, or flip back through any images or slides that you'd like to ask questions about, but thank you. Yeah. Do we have a microphone for? Okay. Okay, great.
Does coquina exist as a building material anywhere else in the world?
You know, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know for sure, but Trey might know. So this is Trey Esner, one of our former students. I do know the coquina deposit in Florida, you know, is very specific to this northeast coast and by the St. Johns River. Trey, do you want to answer? Australia.
Oh.
Wow. Okay.
Not exactly which territory in Australia, but there's cocaine deposits, you know, along the East Coast, but they're only notable grade would be here in Northeast Florida, and then somewhere in Australia.
Wow. Okay, that's good to know. Maybe we need to start collaborating with Australia on some material testing for coquina. Right. Trey's going back to school with us.
So I'm paying for my PhD, I'm all for it.
From our Zoom audience, we had a question. Are you doing any research into preservation of historic buildings impacted by storm-related intermittent flooding?
We kind of do like a Trinidad might be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think one of the interesting things about this work is the different scales that you can investigate heritage and resilience. So the work that we've shown here is really looking at kind of the urban scale, right? And how a neighborhood or a street is going to be impacted. Then you start getting down to the building scale, the material scale. So what happens to the castillo made of coquina when it's absorbing all of this salt water and releasing it and absorbing it and releasing it? What happens to these individual buildings when they have a storm, when they get flooded? The National Park Service has created recommendations and guidelines for how to appropriately treat historic buildings. Some of the solutions are elevation, obviously, relocation, but you know, what about those buildings that aren't easily elevated or easily moved? So they have solutions such as wet proofing, dry proofing. Do you let it flood and then do you let it dry out? Or do you protect it from flooding with different types of dams and materials? So our projects, to answer the question, our projects typically start out looking at a community or a neighborhood. And then once you understand what the potential impacts are going to be, then you can get to the building scale. Now, Sujin mentioned Trinidad. We're currently working on a grant with the National Trust of Trinidad and Tobago. And with that project, we have two specific sites. One is an island called Nelson Island that has historic structures on it. But the island itself is fairly well elevated out of the ocean. So the buildings are okay for now. It's the erosion and the rubble around the edges of the islands that might need to be the first thing we consider. This is where we start working with civil engineers and landscape architects. This is where infrastructure is important. This is where green infrastructure and native gardening and, natural native plants and plants that absorb water are really important for a local home, for a local building and a local site. The other site in Trinidad is part of their downtown area. And we're looking at the vulnerability there as it affects 3 specific buildings. And so we're currently in the middle of this process, but yes, we will be discussing with the National Trust options for their buildings. With that, again, they're masonry structures. So we might have to first consider an infrastructure solution with the roads, with stormwater, and then think about the building itself. So they really go hand in hand. It's why so much infrastructure and engineering is happening here in St. Augustine. Stormwater, the cities really focus on stormwater first because it's a good, straightforward engineering solution to minimize the problem.
I have a couple questions. The first question is, how do you work with the individuals or with the city? If the city owns houses, how do you exchange information?
Yeah, well, right now for St. Augustine, this project that Sujin was showing you that was funded by the National Park Service, that was money that came after Hurricane Irma from the National Park Service through the state, and then the state passed that money on to the city. So this work was directly in collaboration with the city government, with the city planning office, the city manager's office, the chief resilience officer. And really the city is currently the entity that works with building owners. One of the things that we have been talking about is how we can get more involved in assisting owners and working with the community. And I think that's something that we look forward to delving more into. These sorts of brochures are things that were developed by the city for homeowners. And I know that, for example, there's a lot of local building owner and homeowner discussion about elevation, about mitigation to your own home that's happening now. I think of Davis Shores, for example, as a neighborhood where that's happening. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also, you mentioned the Nombre de Dios property. Does that include Fort Moses or not?
Did you work on that project?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did it include Fort Mose when you were working on it?
No, we didn't.
No, it
Yeah.
was just that
So-
one particular,
Right.
yeah.
So the interesting thing I learned about the archaeological practice was that they kind of excavate the underground features like a little by a little. So the only just a level. So whenever the grant is not allowing anymore, they have to rebury the site again. And then when the funding is available, they reopen the site. So it sounds like a very painful process, but which also makes sense that because you cannot just leave it exposed, otherwise it's going to damage this precious resource. So for that reason, we before they rebury the site, we just help them kind of record this thing. I don't know if it's still open, but whenever they make some more progress, we might continue to help and collaborate. So Yeah, but anyway, it's not really answering your question, but yeah, my simple question was, no, we did, unfortunately, we didn't have a chance to work on that part.
Thank you all so much. We really appreciate your questions.
Thank you. Thank you to our speakers this evening. Those images were really eye-opening, dramatic, and just gives you so much more to think about, I think, and really helpful. I hope you can join us February 9th. Our next speaker will be talking about circadian rhythms and muscles, and she is the director for the Center of Aging. And since that applies to all of us, hopefully we can learn some things. So I hope you can join us to hear Dr. Karen Esser on February 9th. Thank you so much.